So this video is going to talk a little bit about carbon dioxide. So carbon dioxide is a gas that has many sources. It makes up, its current levels are a little bit over 400 parts per million in the atmosphere. So it's a very small percentage of our atmosphere, but it is a very significant percentage. Life as we know it wouldn't exist without carbon dioxide. It has many natural sources, combustion like natural forest fires, burning of prairies, again, lightning strikes. There are many natural sources of combustion. Respiration, cellular respiration releases carbon dioxide. Decomposition, aerobic decomposition is cellular respiration, which releases CO2. Even anaerobic respiration or fermentation releases CO2. And volcanic eruptions are another natural source of CO2. So there are many, many, many natural sources of CO2. However, there are also anthropogenic sources of CO2, and the main one that we focus on is combustion, but combustion in this case of like fossil fuels. So combustion caused by humans. When we're digging up carbon compounds that have been in the ground for thousands or millions of years, and then we're burning it, we are now putting that CO2 in the atmosphere, and it hasn't been there for a long time. That is our anthropogenic source of CO2. Environmental impact. We will spend much of Unit 9 talking about global warming or global climate change. So I'm going to kind of hold off on that. But the big impact is global climate change. We don't put it in with these other air pollutants in this unit because it's not going to cause respiratory distress to humans. It's not linked with acid rain environmentally. So it's like its own whole separate thing in terms of global climate change. And here in the United States, we've been very slow to regulate it because it's a global issue. And again, we don't see like direct impacts necessarily in our cities. It's more of a whole global problem. Human health impacts, again, there's none. We inhale, there is CO2 in the air naturally. We're inhaling it. And when we exhale, our body has done cellular respiration. And so there are higher levels of CO2 in our exhale. So there are not direct human health impacts from it. How can we reduce it? So you have to go back to always your sources. So if I'm going to go to natural sources, so I'm going to go back for a second in the slide to my natural sources. I can't really reduce natural forest fires potentially. They're going to happen. Some of them are going to happen. Respiration, I'm not just going to go kill stuff. That would not be real ethical. So I can't really reduce respiration or decomposition as part of how matter cycles. Can't really control volcanic eruptions. So what I have to do is I have to look at my anthropogenic or my human cause sources and think about how I could reduce those. So when I think about those, again, burning fossil fuels. So burning of gasoline. So if I carpool, I walk, I ride a bike, I drive a more efficient car, so it burns less gasoline and releases less CO2. If I take public transportation, less CO2 is being released. Those would all reduce the CO2 emissions from like the combustion of gasoline. If I get my electricity in a different way, or I heat my home, I have to spend less energy to heat my home. There'd be less coal combustion for the electricity, or there'd be less natural gas combustion for either the electricity or for heating of my home. That would reduce CO2 emissions. Some alternative energy sources like solar and wind would reduce CO2. Biomass would not reduce CO2 because it's burning. It's just burning to something different. So again, I have to be careful if I say alternative energy sources. I have to be specific, like a solar or a wind would reduce it. Other things we can do is actually we can remember back to photosynthesis. Photosynthesis takes in CO2. So another thing I could do is I could plant more trees. And I could reduce destruction of like forests or green space, things like that. So people talk about protecting the tropical rainforest, not only because of the habitat that would be protected, but also those trees will take in that CO2 and they will store some of that, which is also then another solution is this idea of carbon sequestering. Carbon sequestering is basically taking carbon dioxide from the air and storing it away. There are some technical ways of doing that where they will try to do things like they'll take carbon dioxide from like a coal plant and inject it deep in the ground or do things to solidify it. Those are all more theoretical, really, not at this point, not like in a large scale. But also remember, like no-till farming. If we're not plowing up the land, oxygen is not getting introduced into the soil becomes anaerobic, and the carbon of like the root in the roots and the other things stay buried in there, and so that sequesters or stores the carbon. So that is another way. Again, a no-till farming is amazing, or conservation tillage, the other name for it, is amazing because it reduces topsoil erosion. So that's a great solution for the issue of topsoil erosion, and it can actually help store carbon and sequester carbon, and can help with this global climate change. So there are a variety of solutions, but sometimes, again, there's always complications with solutions too. It is a primary air pollutant because, again, it's released directly from the process of combustion. And is it regulated? This is where you're going to go back and forth. If the U.S. is part of the Paris Agreement, it is. Paris Agreement gets a little bit interesting because it's a non-binding agreement. But it is something, again, we're trying to do that to reduce CO2 emissions. Kyoto Treaty is now passed. Countries who signed it, the United States did not sign it. I don't think they're going to have that on the AP test anymore, but it was for those who signed it. And then I also have on this slide CAA, the Clean Air Act. Never really was part of the Clean Air Act. The Obama administration had tried to get it to be part of it. But then what the Obama administration did is it joined the Paris Agreement. The Trump administration left the Paris Agreement, and then the Biden administration rejoined the Paris Agreement. So you get interesting politics involved in this issue too. So that's just CO2 in a nutshell. I hope that was helpful.